Live, where we rap sports analysis.
So what's up, guys? You got the number one pick. You're excited, but what do you do? Who do you pick? Is it Zeke? Is it Gurley? Is it Bell? Is it someone else? I think this year especially, it's really hard to narrow down that number one pick. You can make a case for as many as 8 guys, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Starting with last year's PPR champ, Todd Gurley. So Todd Gurley, reading off some stats to you, he had 383.3 points, 25.6 points a game. That's pretty hard to replicate. He had just under 300 carries, 279, 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns, and another 64 catches for 788 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, I do expect his carries, his yards, and probably even his touchdowns to be about the same. 279, I think, is a good number for him. Once you get over that 300 carry mark, that's when it starts getting a little dangerous. Running backs start to wear down. But 279, I think, is about right. 13 touchdowns, while it is a lot, I do expect the Rams offense to be just as potent, if not even more potent than they were last year. Goff has another year under his belt. You replace Sammy Watkins with Brandon Cooks, and they're more or less a wash, but I think Brandon Cooks in this offense will be slightly better. He's a little more dynamic. You could do a few more things with Brandon Cook that'll also help open things up for Todd Gurley, but it might take away from some of his receiving. I mean, 64 catches, I think he'll get around there, anywhere between 50 and 60 catches, but he also had 6 touchdowns, which is quite a bit of receiving touchdowns for a running back. So I do expect that to go down just slightly. However, if Gurley stays healthy, I do think he's worth a number one pick. I don't often recommend picking a receiver number one. Usually you want to go running back because that's going to be the foundation of your team. They're more consistent. But there's 2 exceptions to that rule, specifically this year. And my first exception is Antonio Brown. I mean, this guy defines consistency. Let's look at the stats. So, last year, he averaged 22.2 points a game, had over 300 points in only 14 games. That includes 1,533 yards, 9 touchdowns, and over 100 receptions. And remember, guys, that was only in 14 games. He had 8 games over 20 points and only 3 games under 10 points. So if there's anyone you want to pick at the receiver at number one, it's definitely going to be Antonio Brown. Specifically because this year, more than other years, the running back position is extremely deep. You could get some quality backs in the mid to later rounds, and receivers are not, a true number one receiver is not that easy to find. They're a lot less common. So I have no problem with anyone going for AB as their number one pick. The other receiver that garners consideration for the number one pick is DeAndre Hopkins. This guy had a monster year. He led all receivers with 13 touchdowns, had over 300 points at the wide receiver position, and he's just a model of consistency. Is hardly ever injured, played in 15 games last year. He got over 1,300 yards receiving, 96 receptions, so almost 100 receptions, and he also only had 1 game under 10 points, and that was 9.9 points. And he had 5 games over 20 and 2 games under 15 points, which was 14.3 points and 14.6 points. So if you want somebody consistent, and it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, because Deshaun Watson was probably gone for over half the year, and he still put up monster numbers. If there's anybody from the wide receiver position that you want to consider at number one, it's definitely DeAndre Hopkins. Now, another guy that can garner consideration for the number one pick is ALVIN KAMARA. This guy was in a full-blown committee to start the year with AP and Mark Ingram and still ended up 3rd amongst all running backs as a rookie. Now, I don't see any reason why he should drop off, especially Ingram's going to be out the first 4 games, And the reason I like KAMARA so much is he's so dynamic in the pass catching game, which is so important in PPR. This is going to be a pass first offense, so he's going to get plenty of opportunities under Drew Brees, and I don't see any reason at all why there should be a drop off. If anything, I think he can improve on those numbers, and depending how some of these other running backs do, he can end up third or he can end up first. I mean, he's that dynamic, he's in the right offense, and he's matchup proof because if they're up, they can run the ball, they can still do those bubble screens to kind of keep the defense off the field, and if they're down, he's definitely going to be a part of the passing game and trying to get them to come back from any deficit. Alvin Kamara is definitely worth a #1 pick. This might be a surprise to some, but someone I would consider with the #1 pick is Saquon Barkley. Yes, I know he's a rookie, but that means absolutely nothing. 4 of the top 10 running backs last year were rookies, and none of them were as dynamic as Saquon Barkley, both in the run game and the pass game. The other reason I like him is because of his coach, Pat Shurmur. Pat Shurmur was the offensive coordinator last year for the Minnesota Vikings, the coach of Dalvin Cook, who was a top 10 running back before he got injured, had 11 receptions in 3.5 games, and Saquon is a lot more dynamic in the passing game and probably just as good a runner. So if you have any qualms about taking Saquon Barkley, don't, because this guy's in for a monster year. So this next guy is probably my favorite to be #1. I mean, talk about consistency. Ezekiel Elliott only played 10 games last year and still finished as an RB1, right on the Cubs, 12th to be exact. This guy averaged over 20 points per game, and that offense totally revolves around Ezekiel Elliott. He's also present in the pass game, and I mean, this might be crazy to say, but I think he's gonna at least flirt with the NFL rushing single season record this year. Ezekiel Elliott is probably the safest pick and somebody you probably really want to consider at #1. So another obvious guy that can be considered a #1 pick is Le'Veon Bell. I mean, another guy who's just super consistent. That offense, the Pittsburgh offense, which is one of the most dynamic in the league, revolves around this man. And he averaged last year 22.8 points a game, second to only Todd Gurley's 25 points a game. So Le'Veon Bell is probably as safe as you can get. Now, I am a little concerned. After the holdout last year, he started off slow his first 2 games, but then picked it up and became the Le'Veon Bell we all love. But he's again holding out, so he's a little disgruntled. So I'm a little worried about Le'Veon Bell. However, I mean, you can't argue with the consistency. The numbers speak for themselves, and he's somebody that definitely garners #1 attention. So this next guy needs no introduction, David Johnson. His 2016 season was just flat out historic. His numbers per game were 25.5 points. He had over 400 points in the season, 80 receptions, 879 yards, and 4 touchdowns in the air. And he also had almost 300 carries, 1,239 yards, and 16 touchdowns on the ground. Now, I don't quite expect the 2016 season because the Arizona Cardinals offense, there's a lot of question marks to say the least. That offensive line is not very good. They lost their center for the year. So I am concerned how much effectiveness he will have on the ground, but because he's such a dynamic player and has such a great ability to catch the ball, I do expect him to have a top 5 finish this year as long as he's healthy. That wrist injury was a freak injury. He's never had any lower body injuries, so that's good. But because the Cardinals will be a bad team in my opinion, and I expect them to be down quite a bit because of their offense and their defense is average at best, that can actually play into David Johnson's favor as far as the catching games is concerned. I don't expect him to get anywhere near 300 carries this year, but those 80 receptions, he could even build on those as well as the yardage and the touchdowns in the passing game. So David Johnson is about as safe pick as you can get. And definitely garners #1 consideration. Thank you guys for watching my video. If you want to see more of these types of videos, please give a like. Also, comment down below, who do you think should be #1 and why? Other than that, guys, I'm out. Sports Lips.